UK. It's a paper he's presenting on behalf of himself and a colleague, Dr.Eppie Estanislao-Clark from the Salle University of the Philippines. David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to say, for the background, that my role at Manchester Metropolitan University has been for many years to teach in the area of operations management. Teach in the area of operations management and moving from that into issues relating to new product development, supply chain management and the like. And more recently I've been involved with a European funded project which is trying to develop links between the universities in the Northwest and local industry. And if you want to know more about this, I've got a third newsletter. I've got several copies of this, and it gives you an idea of the kind of work that we are doing. We've been doing that for 2 years now, and we are expecting to continue for another 4 years in the next round of European funding. The background to this work is that Eppie Estanislao-Clark came to the UK from the Philippines to do work in the area of manufacturing and team-based approaches to manufacturing, and this was one of my interests. And so we teamed up, and this paper is one of the results of that collaboration. What we're doing is to look at the implementation of team working, and the context will be the Philippines, but whether it be in the Philippines or in the UK or anywhere else, has been a long experience of mixed results for team working. Sometimes people say it's gone well, other times people say that it has been full of difficulties. There are lots of management problems associated with the implementation of team working, and lots of worker problems. And one of the questions we need to ask fairly early on is the problem one of technology transfer? So do we need a technological attack on solving the problems, or is the problem to do with the culture of management, the culture of the people? And this is the area that our paper is seeking to contribute to. And we're certainly coming to it from the perspective that cultural issues are very important in the implementation of any manufacturing system, and certainly teamwork. So what is culture? We're using the word culture to represent any integrated value system where people hold values as part of their community, as part of their local culture. And the value system we're defining as an enduring organisation of beliefs concerning preferable modes of conduct, how you behave, how you do certain things. And in the world of work, this is often referred in a sort of shorthand as the work ethos of the community. Our case studies are drawn from the Philippines. And this is a very interesting area to study because of the unique mingling of Western and Eastern influences. And Philippine society does have a very strong collectivist philosophy. They have a much greater sense of community than many Western cultures, and this is something that has emerged in the study. We have sought to develop this work by building our thoughts around various case studies, and 2 case studies are part of this presentation. The first company makes jeans and jackets for Gap and Banana Republic. The second company is jeans and jackets for Levi Strauss. The Gap company, they set up teams which were quite large, 18 operators using 25 machines. The first team used experienced operators to get it right, as it were, right at the start. But subsequent teams were put together using contract labour. And the labour was contracted for 6 months, and then they were made redundant. And they were all on the basic rate of pay. Now, this business about contract labour is really a vehicle for the company to avoid long-term commitments to labour. Labour employed for 6 months, then they go back into the labour pool. If they come back again, they come back for another 6 months. This meant that there was a continuous need in this company for retraining, for recruitment, replacing people who were leaving. The management, they had a lot of exposure to team working concepts, and this was driven by senior management who were aware of the potential of team working. And it did involve people right across the factory, managers, line leaders, production control, and so on. So everybody from a management level got involved. The Levi company, or company making the Levi, was rather different. They pursued the idea of team working as a fast-track line, and 32 workers were employed. And they were all in permanent employment and paid above the basic rate. They were like a special team that were producing the fast-track goods. So they wanted to have this skilled, flexible workforce. And they held many seminars on value formation. They looked at the corporate values of the company, Filipino values and how these related together. They looked at issues like how a team should work, how we build a team, how we make decisions, how we resolve conflicts. So they put a lot of effort into the development of teams. The management, they also did a lot of learning. They were trying to develop this strategy of a demand-led supply with lean production. This is where the teams fitted in. It was driven by the parent company in the States, while the parent company was very keen on teamwork at that time. And they put together a management committee involving many different people within the organisation, and they too had various seminars on values. Let's get used to the keyboard. So this is a brief comparison of these two companies. The company Y, they started with a lot of management know-how, whereas company Z, they got much less experience of what they were talking about. Both companies, though, put a lot of effort into the development of management. But the biggest difference was in the type of labour. Company Y used contract labour on minimum wages. They wanted to keep the costs down and to have no commitment to the workforce. Company Z had a special group of better paid and permanent members of the workforce. So Company Y had a big investment in recruitment and training, which Company Z didn't have. But in Company Z, there were lots of opportunities for people to develop their skills over periods longer than 6 months. And so these companies had different goals. Company Y, they wanted to keep costs down. Company Z, they wanted to have maximum flexibility. So these differences were part of the strategy of these two companies. But despite those differences, both of these cases were deemed to be successful implementations of team working. The teams actually worked. And this is perhaps most surprising in the company that only had people for 6 months at a time, and then changed their labour laws. But it just happens that but in both cases, team working was successful. So why was this? This is part of where we come to values. There are a number of values, Filipino values, that were highlighted in this study, of which listed them here, and we'll look at them more closely. These values were observed as part of the dynamics of the team activity. So the first one, timidity. These values, by the way, are fairly widely recognised by people who have studied the Filipino culture and the workforce. So the novelty is not in the values per se, but in the seeing it in action, in team working. So the timidity characteristic revealed itself in the way that it took time for teams to become self-organised, to get confidence, to communicate. But it was overcome by the support of management. People did recognise this trait and they addressed it. And so this potential area of weakness was overcome. The high context language. This is where communication is not so much through articulation of concepts and words, but it was through the context, through personal, this body language, that kind of activity. And this high context language was not only understood by the workers, it was understood by the line leaders. They were not only over the teams, but they were part of the teams, and their ability to participate in this high context language meant that communication was good. Small groupism, another value that is part of Filipino culture. This was observed when people favoured their own team in preference to anything else. And their favour is shown in the way that they contributed to the activities of the team, to protect the interests of the team, seeking and getting support in times of difficulty. So the team behaviour was cemented by this particular value. This Filipino higher value is understood to be a feeling of pain when shamed before one's peers. So that this means that people are very careful about giving criticisms of others when they are part of a peer group. It can be a negative aspect. It can mean that the culprit, somebody doing something wrong, is concealed because you don't want to cause them any pain as part of your group. So this is one of the values that can be positive or it can be negative. In the cases that we observed, it emerged as a positive value. Akikisama is the need to be accepted by colleagues by conforming to group norms. This spirit of conforming to group norms is very strong. And whereas in the West we're very familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, this doesn't seem to apply in the same way to Filipino culture. The Pakikisama value is something that is pretty strong, and it has a positive effect when the group is working well, the group contributes well to know-how, effort, personal time, but it can be a negative thing if workers esteem informal and disruptive leaders as giving them undue acceptance. The last one, duality of Filipino values. This is where it sums up the fact that many of these values can have a positive or a negative effect, and it's the task of the team leaders and the managers to identify this duality and to really try and exploit the positives. So this brings us to our set of conclusions now. we have 5 conclusions. The first one, the workers' values do have an impact on system performance. They're relevant to organisational system design. This was very apparent in these Filipino case studies, and it did seem that actually organisational issues were almost subservient to the values of the operators, in spite of certain practices that would seem to be not in the interest of teamwork. The Filipino culture overcame that, and the teamworking spirit dominated. So training for teamworking should recognise that you can't just put in teamworking spirit like you put in a machine. You have to be sensitive to the people, their culture, their values, and find ways of drawing out the strengths of local values and translating that into positive action. And the third point, policy is a management responsibility. Policy regarding values must identify existing cultural norms and identify ways of transforming values. Things that managers don't often think about, but nevertheless are very significant when it comes to operational activities. And this is my last slide. The facilitative management style, which we were noting in the Filipino case studies, this was actually quite new to the Filipino workers. They'd been used to quite autocratic styles or paternalistic styles, where management, they say what goes, and the ability for teams to be autonomous and to be able to influence what they're doing is not very significant. Now, the change was facilitated by managers. Both these companies showed that. The managers put a fair bit of effort into what they should be doing in supporting teamwork. And the last point, corporate strategies create environments that may either support or undermine the effectiveness of teams. Whatever went on the factory floor could be completely overwhelmed by corporate strategy. And this, in fact, was the case with the Levi company. Because when Levi's changed in the States and said we are no longer going to pursue teamworking, that just rippled through the whole organisation. And this factory that was practicing teamworking successfully, making a good go of it, they just stopped it, just because the corporate strategy was not really in sympathy with what was going on. So that brings me to a conclusion. Thank you.
I'd like to thank David for a very stimulating talk. Just whilst again we get the next presentation organised in terms of technology. Any questions? Any questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. It's very interesting on the teamwork. I just wonder whether the result can be applied in other areas, say in China or in some other area. I mean, if there's a generic result you've got, whether it will be applicable to other countries because of cultural difference.
Oh yes, the principle here is that it applies in every country. It certainly applies in the UK, where we have a tendency for these issues to be neglected. And in many cases, people have put in teamworking as a cost-cutting exercise, whereas it should be put in order to allow the company to do new and interesting things in enhancing the service to their customers. And the management just have not really addressed that issue. Regarding China, I'm not quite sure how long ago it was, but it was probably at least 10 years. With one of my master students at the time, we did a study on just-in-time issues and Chinese culture, where a number of Chinese culture values came out as being relevant to the implementation of JIT. So that was in Textile Asia last year.
So we certainly at that time were very conscious that Chinese values there were some positive contributions and some negative. And so it was very important that managers identify what they wanted to do, exploit the positive, and take appropriate action with the negatives.
Okay, thank you very much.